A very good morning, students. We are on the second lecture on the skeletal system, and today I will tell you very briefly about the classification of bones. Okay, so let's move to the next slide for the classification. The bones are classified in different ways. Okay, now they may be classified on the basis of their shape. Okay, so the first classification is on the basis of their shape. That means whether they are long bone, short bone, or like that. I'm just going to tell you all these kinds of the bones on the basis of their shape. Then secondly, they can also be classified on the basis of their location in the body. Okay, so where they are located, whether they are in midline or they are in the limbs, on the basis of their gross structure. That means when you see a bone by the naked eye, then how the structure looks like, that is the classification will be based on their gross structure. Next, the classification will be based when you will see the bone under the microscope, okay, which you cannot see by naked eye. Then what are the structures seen under the microscope in a bone? And then lastly, I will tell you about the classification of the bones on the basis of their embryological development. So let's move to the first classification, which is on the basis of their shape. Now, if you see on the basis of their shape, the classification based on their shape, you will note that the most of the bones in the limbs, okay, they are the long bones, okay, and long bones, they may be from upper limb, lower limb, for example, humerus, radius ulna, tibia, fibula, or the femur. They are the quite long bones. I will just show you a long bone here. See this bone, this is a long bone, and the characteristic of the long bone is that it has two ends. Okay, this is the, say for example, upper end, then there is another end here that is called as the lower end, and between the two ends of the long bone there is a shaft. So thus on the basis of their size, okay, and ends and the intervening shaft, you can identify a long bones. And I have just said that these long bones are present in the limbs, but then there is a long bone here, see this, and this is the long bone from the pectoral girdle, and that is the clavicle. Now if I show you any other long bones which are also classified as the miniature long bone, see this is the skeleton of the hand, and here this part of the skeleton of the hand is called as the metacarpals. And these metacarpals, they are also classified as long bone, but since their size is small, they are given the name as miniature long bone. And in the miniature long bone, they will have the same characteristic of the ordinary long bone seen from the limbs. They will have the two ends and the intervening shaft is there. Okay, so are the phalanges. Okay, the skeleton of the finger. So this is the how the bone are classified based on their uh, length. Okay, so it is the long bones. Second, if we come to the bone, that is the short bones, and short bones are small bones, and here you can see this short bone. These are in the skeleton of the hand, or they form the wrist area. See this. These small bones, if you can see these small bones, they are multiple. There are 8 bones, okay? 8 small bones, and they are called as the short bones, and they just articulate with each other. That means they form a joint. So they have mostly surfaces is mostly quadrilateral and shows the articular facet on their surface. But most important thing for the short bone is that their size is short. They do not show anything like the ends or the shaft. Okay, so this is the second class. The other side, except the carpal bones where these short bones are found, is these are also seen in the foot, okay, at the ankle, okay, which are called as the tarsal bones. Okay, they are called as tarsal in the foot. Now, then we come to the third class of the bone based on its shape is the flat bone. and the flat bone, they are plate-like, flat. Okay, for example, if you see this flat bone, this is the bone called as the scapula. The diagram is also here. You can see from this diagram, this is the diagram of scapula, and these are the flat bones. The other example of the flat bones are the bones of our head. So, for example, which forms the brain box, that is the frontal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone, even the ribs which are forming the thoracic cage. Okay, see, this is a rib, and this is also an example, though it is quite long, having the two ends. Okay, but this is mostly classified as the flat bones. Now if you see the function of the flat bones, which are seen, as I said, that it is seen in the ribs, I mean say ribs are flat bones, and the bones of our skull, if you will see this, they are mainly protective in nature. That means the bones, flat bones, frontal, parietal, occipital bones of our skull, they form the brain box and protect our brain. Similarly, the ribs form the cage, what is called as thoracic cage or the rib cage, and they also protect important vital organs of the body, for example, the uh, lung and heart. Okay, the lung. So these were the flat bone. Coming to the fourth kind of the bone, which is in the classification, they are irregular bones. Okay, and irregular bones means they do not have any particular shape, and they are having so many processes or surfaces. For example, here this is a vertebra. Okay, I am having a bunch of the vertebrae, and these vertebrae, they are quite irregular in shape. Okay, so another example of the irregular bone is this hip bone. You can see that there are so many irregularities are seen in this bone. You cannot define any, I mean say, very specific shape of this bone. So this kind of the bone is called as the irregular bones. And then comes the pneumatic bones, and pneumatic bones are seen in skull, where there is the presence of the air inside the bone, and these bones, pneumatic bones, say for example, all those bones which are classified as the bones forming the paranasal air sinus. It is the frontal bone, this is the frontal bone, and there is an air cavity inside the frontal bone. Then by the side of the nose there are ethmoid bones. Then this is the which forms the cheek here, prominence of the cheek. These are called as the maxillary bone, and deeply situated inside the body there is bone called as the sphenoid bone, and behind the ear there is a bone, bony prominence, and that is called as the mastoid. All these bones, they contain air cavity inside, and they are classified as the pneumatic bones. Now their function of these pneumatic bone is just to reduce the weight, okay, of the bones. Okay, since the air is filled inside it, they also help in the resonance of the voice. You must have noticed that when you get the common cold, your voice changes, and because that all those pneumatic cavities or air cavities which are surrounding to the nose, they are filled with the liquid. Okay, and I mean say the air is displaced. Okay, and that's why our resonance is not produced. Then lastly, in the classification based on their shape are the sesamoid bone. Okay, if you see in this diagram here, this is a sesamoid bone, and a sesamoid bone develops in the tendon. Now, these bone are not present at birth. Okay, sesamoid bones usually develop after the birth, and they develop whenever a tendon is crossing the end of a long bone. So these bones, sesamoid bones, they develop as a measure to avoid the friction of the tendon onto the end of any bones. Okay, long bone. Mostly they are seen in relation to the hand in relation. There are many small sesamoid bone in hand, in the foot, at the back of the knee joint also. This sesamoid bone which you are seeing here is quite largest in the body, and this is called as patella, and this is also in the layman terms called as the kneecap, which you can feel, okay, in front of your knee. Now another function of this sesamoid bone is without say except that it is avoiding the friction between the tendon and the bone surface. This is also changing this direction of the pull of the force, because the tendon can change its direction at its proximal and the distal end of the attachment. So change in the direction of the forces are also possible because of the presence of the sesamoid bone. Now another peculiarity of the sesamoid bone is that surface of sesamoid bone, where I am moving my pointer in patella here, that which comes in contact with a long bone here, is always covered by articular cartilage. Okay, so this is another peculiarity. And lastly, I will tell you about sesamoid bone. Since they are not presented at birth, they develop after birth due to avoid this friction between the bones and the tendon. They are not covered by the periosteum. So these are the only bone sesamoid in the body which are not covered. And by this time, in last part of the skeletal system, part 1, I told you what is a periosteum, which is a membrane covering to the body, right? So now we move to the next slide after this classification, which was based on to the uh, just a minute. This was based on the shape of the bones. Okay, I'm moving to the next. Just a minute. Now, if we move to the next slide here, then what we will see that this bones can also be classified based on location of these bones in body, and this I have already covered in the last lecture, that is in the first lecture on skeletal system. And this is the uh, axial skeleton and appendicular. That means the bones in our body are classified into two different ways. Axial skeleton are those bones which are present in midline, say for example skull, then the vertebral column, sternum, and the ribs attached to this sternum forming thoracic cage. These are all those bones which are comes under the axial skeleton. They are close to the median plane. Appendicular skeleton, you have already known that those bones which are forming the bones of the limbs, upper limb, lower limb, and the girdles also, pectoral and this pelvic girdle. So all these bones, thus this skeleton or the bones of the uh, are also classified in two different ways, axial skeleton and that of the appendicular skeleton. Okay, let's move to the next slide. This is another classification, and this classification of bones is based on their gross structure as seen by naked eye. So if you cut a longitudinal section of any bone as it is seen here in this diagram, see this is the tibia cut in longitudinal section, and with the help of your naked eye you can see the two different types of the bones. One which is forming the end of the bone, long bone, it is spongy bone, looks like a sponge. There are a lot of interconnected spaces are there which are present in between the interanastomotic bony spicules, trabecules, plates, cord plates are there, and they form a spongy bone. Okay, and I have told you in the last lecture that this spongy bone at the ends of the long bones, it contains the bone marrow, which is the site for the production of the blood cells. But if you will move down here in the towards the shaft of a long bone, then you will see that there is nothing like a spongy bone here. Now this bone is, which is seen, okay, by the naked eye, is compact, and compact because there are no spaces seen here. It is very tough and compact bone. So in this way we can classify the bone also as a spongy bone and the compact bone which is present in the shaft. Okay, now this classification is based on the when you see these bones by the naked eye. But when I will go to the next slide, I will tell you another classification which is based on observation of these two bones, that is the spongy bone and the compact bone under the microscope. So first I will tell you the structure of the spongy bone as seen under microscope, and then I will cover the structure of the compact bone as seen under microscope. So I am moving to the next slide. Now, this shows the classification based on microscopic structure. If you will see the spongy bone under microscope, as I said in the last slide, that they are formed by the intra-anastomosis of the rods, plates, okay? The trabeculae they are called as, and they enclose lot of free spaces. And these spaces, I told you that it is called as the marrow cavity, which is filled in living condition by the bone marrow, which is the site for formation of the bone. Now this trabeculae and plates, they are formed by the layers of the bone, which you will learn in great detail when I will teach you about the microscopic structure of bone in histology. Okay, now here you can see bundles of the collagen fibers which are embedded in the ground substance, and this dot which you are seeing elliptical, they are nothing but the spaces in which in living condition there is the presence of the osteocyte, which are the bone cells, resting bone cell. So this will be a picture of the spongy bone when you will see under the microscope. Okay, but when you will see the picture of a compact bone taken from the shaft of any long bone or any other bone which is made up of the compact bone, you can see that this has a very peculiar arrangement of the bony tissue. Now this, if you will see in the center, there are circles are seen here. They are the lamellae, okay, surrounding to a Haversian canal, which is the central canal through which passes the blood vessels and the nerve, and this bony tissue then it cover in the form of a circle. Now this whole set of a circle surrounding to this Haversian canal is called as osteon or Haversian system. And in this way there are so many Haversian system or osteons will form a compact bone. Those Haversian canal will not be seen by naked eye. That's why it looks completely compact when you see by naked eye. Now then, these layers of the bony tissue may cover on surface. This is called as the external circumferential lamellae, and similarly towards the bone marrow. Here will be the marrow cavity, okay, and filled with the bone marrow, and towards the marrow cavity the similar circumferential lamellae are present. Lamellae means layers of the bony tissue, and these are called as the internal circumference. This was external, this is internal, and in between the two is the presence of the osteons or Haversian systems. Now, I will not go further. Okay, you are seeing this kind of a structure under the microscope, and a great detail of which will be taught to you when you will go in the histology. Okay, next slide, please. In this next slide, we see the classification based on the embryological development. Now, you must have read, or I will, in the next video, I may tell you about how a bone develops. So, bone after, I mean, say, during the intrauterine life of a in a fetus or embryo, it starts developing either in membrane. That means first in the embryo, the membrane is formed because of the condensation of mesenchymal tissue. And what are mesenchymal tissue? They are nothing but the connective tissue of an embryo. When they condense, they form the membrane, and on this membrane the bone is formed. So it is called as membranous ossification. Second kind of say ossification is cartilaginous ossification. It means that here after mesenchymal condensation, first the bone is formed, say membrane is formed, and then this membrane changes into the cartilage, hyaline cartilage, and this hyaline cartilage is then gradually replaced by the bone. So this kind of bone is very common, or this kind of ossification or bone formation is very common, and all the long bones of the body, they develop by cartilaginous ossification. That means here the cartilage is first formed and then it is gradually replaced by the bony tissue. So there are two kind of the bones based on the classification of their embryological development, a membranous bone and cartilage. As I said that almost all of our bones in the limbs, okay, and in skull, okay, and in ribs, okay, and in vertebrae, they are cartilaginous. Membranous bones are more usually the flat bones. For example, I told you they were the frontal bone, parietal bone, and part of the occipital bone. So you have understood different types of classification of bones, and in the next video I will teach you how a bone develops in intrauterine life. Thank you very much.